The overconfident invasion. The alien fleet moved through the darkness of space with a quiet arrogance, their massive warships cutting through the void like blades of destruction. The Varnuk Empire had conquered dozens of worlds, their technology superior to most civilizations they encountered. To them, Earth was just another primitive planet waiting to be crushed beneath their feet. Their analysts had studied the human military, their history of warfare, and their outdated weapons. The conclusion was always the same. This was going to be an easy victory. Admiral Zorvak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominance, a warship that had led countless successful invasions. He gazed at the holographic projection of Earth, his expression filled with amusement. This is the species that dares to call themselves warriors, he scoffed, addressing his officers. They fight among themselves. Their weapons are centuries behind ours, and they have no unified defense system. This invasion will be over before they even know what hit them. The officers nodded in agreement, their confidence unshaken. The Varnuk military had never lost a battle. They had destroyed fleets, enslaved entire populations, and dismantled planetary governments with little effort. Their warships were heavily armored, equipped with energy shields and plasma cannons that could turn entire cities into dust. Against such power, what could humanity possibly do? The invasion plan was simple. A fleet of warships would enter Earth's orbit, broadcasting a demand for immediate surrender. If the humans refused, targeted bombardments would eliminate their defenses. Then, ground forces would descend, securing major cities in a matter of hours. There would be no prolonged war, no resistance that could threaten the might of the Varnuk Empire. As the fleet approached Earth's atmosphere, the first transmission was sent. A deep, guttural voice echoed through every communication system on the planet, interrupting broadcasts, disabling satellites, and hacking into military frequencies. Humans of Earth, you are now subjects of the Varnuk Empire. Surrender immediately, and you will be spared unnecessary suffering. Resistance is futile. You have 1 hour to comply. Across the planet, leaders of various nations gathered in emergency meetings, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. The sheer scale of the alien fleet was overwhelming. Cities trembled as warships loomed above them, casting massive shadows over the land below. The skies were filled with dark metal giants, their engines humming with an eerie energy. But something was wrong. The humans weren't panicking as expected. They weren't rushing to surrender. Instead, something else was happening, something the Varnuk had not anticipated. Hidden beneath the surface of the planet, inside secret military bases and underground bunkers, humanity was preparing. Generals exchanged knowing glances, officers tightened their grips on their weapons, and soldiers stood at attention, awaiting their orders. They had known this day would come. The universe was vast, filled with unknown dangers, and humanity had learned long ago never to trust in peace for too long. Admiral Zorvak watched the planet below, waiting for the human leaders to beg for mercy. But there was only silence. Then, without warning, the skies above Earth erupted with fire. Missiles launched from hidden silos, targeting the Varnuk fleet with terrifying precision. Orbital defense platforms, disguised as civilian satellites, suddenly came to life, firing energy weapons that cut through the darkness. Ground-based railguns, hidden beneath mountains, opened fire, sending hypersonic projectiles tearing through the enemy's shields. The first Varnuk warship exploded in a bright flash, debris scattering in all directions. The bridge of the Dominance shook violently as alarms blared throughout the ship. The admiral's confident smirk vanished in an instant. "What is happening?" he roared, gripping the edge of the control panel. One of his officers, struggling to maintain composure, responded with urgency. "Sir, the humans have advanced weaponry. Their defense is air." The officer never finished his sentence. A second explosion rocked the fleet, and another warship was torn apart. Panic began to spread among the Varnuk officers. The humans weren't weak. They weren't primitive. And they certainly weren't defenseless. Admiral Zorvek's expression hardened as a terrible realization set in. This was not an easy invasion. This was a trap, and the Varnuk Empire had walked right into it. Admiral Zorvek clenched his fists as the bridge of the Dominance trembled under another impact. Red warning lights flashed across the command consoles, and officers scrambled to assess the damage. The Varnuk fleet had expected an easy conquest, a swift and effortless victory. But now, they were under attack from a planetary defense system they hadn't even known existed. How is this possible? Zorvak snarled, turning to his tactical officer. We scanned this planet for weapons. Our intelligence showed primitive missiles, outdated explosives, and no orbital defense network. The officer, his hands trembling as he worked the controls, shook his head in disbelief. Sir, our scans were wrong. The humans have advanced weaponry, railguns, energy-based cannons, guided missiles far beyond what we estimated. Their defenses were hidden. Zorvek's eyes burned with fury. You mean to tell me we have underestimated these primitives? Before the officer could answer, another explosion ripped through the fleet. A massive human missile, launched from the surface, struck one of the Varnuk warships in its engine core. The resulting detonation sent a shockwave through space, tearing apart smaller vessels caught in the blast radius. In mere minutes, 3 more Varnuk warships were reduced to burning wreckage. Zorvak turned to his communication officer. Hail the fleet, order them to raise shields to maximum, and regroup into defensive formation. The officer struggled to stabilize the comms. Sir, there's heavy interference. The humans are jamming our signals. Zorvek's eyes widened in shock. Jamming technology. That was something only advanced empires possessed. How could these so-called primitive humans have developed such sophisticated warfare tactics? Meanwhile, on the planet below, human military commanders watched the battle unfold with cold determination. General Carter, leader of Earth's defense forces, stood in a high-tech underground command center, his gaze fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield. They took the bait, he said grimly, turning to his officers. Now, let's finish the job. Across the planet, Earth's hidden war machine roared to life. More missiles launched from underground silos, anti-ship railguns fired at hypersonic speeds, and orbital defense platforms unleashed a deadly barrage. The Varnuk fleet, still struggling to adjust, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Inside the Dominance, Zorvak watched in horror as his once mighty fleet was torn apart. The humans were not just fighting back, they were winning. This is impossible, he whispered. How did we not see this coming? Then, the answer hit him like a thunderbolt. The humans had allowed the Varnuk Empire to believe they were weak. They had hidden their true capabilities, letting the galaxy think of them as a primitive race. And now, when the enemy had finally come knocking, humanity had sprung the deadliest trap imaginable. The invasion was no longer a conquest, it was a massacre. And for the first time in his long military career, Admiral Zorvek felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Admiral Zorvek gripped the command console of the Dominance as another violent explosion shook the ship. His once mighty fleet was being shredded by an enemy they had completely underestimated. Sparks rained from the ceiling, the acrid smell of burning circuits filling the bridge. Officers shouted reports, their voices barely masking the panic creeping into the crew. Shields at 20%. One officer cried, "We've lost Bloodfang and Iron Claw. Enemy weapons are bypassing our defenses," another added. Zorvek's mind raced. How had this gone so wrong? Humanity was supposed to be weak, their defenses outdated, their technology laughable. But now, the truth was clear. Their intelligence had been disastrously wrong. Humanity had hidden its true strength, disguising its military power until the moment was right. And now, the Varnuk were paying the price for their arrogance. We must regroup. Zorvak roared, forcing his officers to focus. Order the fleet to fall back. We need to establish a defensive perimeter. But retreating wasn't so simple. On the planet below, General Carter watched the holographic battle display from Earth's underground command center. Every movement of the enemy fleet was tracked, analyzed, and countered in real time. Humanity had spent decades preparing for the possibility of an alien invasion, and now their plans were being executed with ruthless efficiency. "Do not let them escape," Carter ordered. "Cut off their retreat and push them into high orbit. Deploy the interceptor squadrons." Above the planet, the Varnak fleet attempted to pull back, but their escape routes were already sealed. Human warships, previously hidden in deep space stations and disguised as civilian vessels, emerged from the darkness. Sleek, heavily armed, and far deadlier than anything the Varnak had expected, they descended upon the invaders like hunting wolves. Interceptor squadrons, small but fast human attack crafts, swarmed the enemy, dodging plasma fire as they unleashed high-yield torpedoes at key targets. Varnak ships, slow to adapt, struggled to fight back as their formation crumbled. Aboard the Dominance, Admiral Zorvek's fury boiled over. "Enough of this," he bellowed. "Target their largest defense stations and fire at will. If we cannot win, we will burn their world to the ground." The Varnak warships charged their main weapons, massive plasma cannons capable of turning entire cities into ash. Bright energy built up along their hulls, their gunships preparing to unleash devastation on Earth's surface. But humanity had one more surprise. From the far side of the moon, an object the size of a small station moved into position. It was Earth's most classified weapon, an orbital railgun platform known as Titan's Wrath. "Target locked," an operator announced in the command center. "Fire," General Carter ordered. A blinding beam of energy-laced metal, accelerated at near-light speed, tore through the battlefield. It smashed into the largest Varnak warship with devastating force, passing straight through its shields as if they weren't there. A second later, the ship detonated in a spectacular fireball, taking 3 others with it. Panic erupted among the Varnak ranks. Their unstoppable fleet was being obliterated, their weapons rendered useless, their enemies more advanced than they had ever imagined. On the bridge of the Dominance, Admiral Zorvak stood frozen, watching his fleet burn. His overconfidence had led them into a death trap. His empire's pride had blinded them to the truth. And now, for the first time in Varnak history, they faced an opponent they could not defeat. The battle was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. And Zorvek knew, if he didn't escape soon, there would be no survivors at all. Admiral Zorvak's claws dug into the metal railing of the Dominance's bridge as chaos unfolded before his eyes. His fleet, once a symbol of Varnak superiority, was being hunted. Human warships, sleek and brutal, tore through their ranks like predators culling the weak. "Sir," the communications officer shouted, panic thick in his voice, "enemy forces have blocked every escape route. Their ships are cutting off our retreat to deep space." Zorvek's yellow eyes burned with rage. Impossible. There were no human fleets stationed in this sector. Where are these ships coming from? The answer was clear, though he hated to admit it. The humans had been prepared for this moment. Their so-called primitive technology was a deception. Their weak planetary defenses a carefully laid trap. The Varnak Empire had walked straight into a slaughter. A sudden tremor rocked the Dominance, nearly throwing Zorvak off his feet. "Direct hit to our starboard side," an officer reported. "Shields are collapsing. We won't last much longer." Zorvek gritted his teeth. This couldn't be happening. He had led victorious campaigns across the galaxy, crushed civilizations beneath his fleet's firepower. But here, against these humans, he was helpless. He turned to his tactical officer. "How many ships do we still have operational?" The officer hesitated before answering, fear in his voice. "Less than 30, Admiral. We've lost nearly 70% of the fleet." Zorvik's stomach twisted. This wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, General Carter watched the unfolding destruction from his underground command center. His eyes remained cold and focused. "They're trying to retreat," an officer reported. Carter gave a slight nod. Don't let them. Across the battlefield, humanity's forces closed in. Orbital railguns fired again, slicing through Varnock warships like paper. Swarms of interceptors harassed the larger vessels, picking apart their defenses. Missile salvos rained down from the human fleet, each strike hitting with pinpoint accuracy. Zorvac knew his only option now. Order all remaining ships to push forward. Break through their line. Our priority is escape. The Varnock ships surged ahead, engines burning at full power as they attempted to force their way through humanity's blockade. They fired everything they had: plasma cannons, disruptor beams, high-yield explosives. The void between the fleets became a chaotic storm of destruction. But the humans didn't flinch. Their ships dodged and weaved with terrifying precision. Their counterattacks came swift and brutal, targeting engines, weapons, and command centers. The Varnock fleet wasn't just being stopped, it was being picked apart. Zorvac watched in horror as one of his last remaining dreadnoughts, the Fang of Conquest, took a direct hit to its reactor core. The explosion lit up the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the remains of his fleet. The Dominance itself shook violently as another blast struck. Consoles exploded, crew members were thrown to the floor, and alarms screamed through the bridge. "Admiral," an officer gasped, "our engines are failing. We can't move." Zorvac's mind went blank. He had led his people to destruction. The once invincible Varnock fleet was reduced to burning wreckage. The few remaining warships were either disabled or trapped, unable to escape Earth's gravity well. It was over. And the worst part, the humans had barely taken any losses. On the planet below, General Carter exhaled slowly as he watched the final moments of the battle. "Begin boarding operations," he ordered. "I want prisoners, and I want that flagship taken intact." As the human fleet closed in around the Dominance, Admiral Zorvac realized something horrifying. He wasn't going to die a warrior's death. He was going to be captured. Admiral Zorvac stood motionless on the bridge of the Dominance, his sharp claws trembling as the reality of his situation sank in. Smoke filled the air, the stench of burning circuits mixing with the scent of fear. His once mighty warship, the pride of the Varnock fleet, was now a helpless wreck, surrounded by human warships on all sides. The battle was over, and he had lost. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the human fleet," the communications officer reported, his voice barely above a whisper. Zorvac snarled but said nothing. He knew what this was. The humans weren't just going to destroy them. They wanted surrender. A hologram flickered to life before him. General Carter's face appeared, calm and unreadable. His uniform was crisp, his expression cold. Unlike Zorvac, there was no desperation in his eyes, only certainty. "Admiral Zorvac," Carter said, his tone flat. "Your fleet is finished. Your warships are either destroyed or disabled. Your ground forces have been wiped out. Surrender now." Zorvac's claws dug into his palms. The humiliation burned hotter than any fire. The Varnock Empire had never surrendered. To bow before an enemy, especially humans, was unthinkable. "You ask for surrender," Zorvac growled, his voice dripping with venom. "But I know your kind, human. You will not spare us." Carter tilted his head slightly. "You assume we are like you. That's your first mistake." A sharp hiss of frustration escaped Zorvac's throat. "The Varnock do not surrender," he spat. Carter's expression didn't change. "Then you'll die in a wreckage of your own making." The transmission cut off. A tense silence filled the Dominance. The crew waited for Zorvac's command, but he said nothing. He could feel their fear, their uncertainty. Warriors who had once stood proudly now cowered, waiting for their leader to decide their fate. The silence was broken by another officer's panicked voice. "Admiral, the humans are deploying boarding craft. They're coming for us." Zorvac turned sharply. "Seal the doors. Prepare for close quarters combat." The bridge crew scrambled to obey, sealing every possible entrance, fortifying their last stand. Zorvak's personal guards readied their weapons, their red eyes glowing in the dim emergency lights. Minutes passed. The ship creaked and groaned, the distant echoes of battle filling the halls. Then, boom! A deafening explosion rocked the ship as the humans breached the hull. Automated turrets fired wildly into the smoke, but the humans were fast, too fast. Flashes of gunfire illuminated the corridors, and one by one, the Varnock defenders fell. Zorvak's heart pounded. He had fought countless battles, crushed entire civilizations. Yet now, for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar. Dread. A deep, terrible dread that clawed at his mind. The humans weren't just winning. They were hunting them down, efficiently and mercilessly. More explosions tore through the ship. The sounds of gunfire grew closer. Zorvak bared his fangs, gripping his plasma blade tightly. He would not be taken without a fight. Then, the doors to the bridge exploded inward. A shockwave of force sent Varnock officers flying. Smoke filled the air, and through it, human soldiers emerged, armored figures moving with precision, their rifles glowing with lethal energy. Zorvak roared, lunging forward, his plasma blade crackling to life. He swung at the nearest human, but the soldier dodged effortlessly, sidestepping his attack. Before Zorvak could recover, a brutal impact struck his ribs. A punch. Not a plasma blast, not a blade, a human fist. The force of the strike sent Zorvak crashing to the floor. Pain shot through his chest. His ribs had fractured. He gasped, struggling to rise, but a heavy boot pressed against his throat, pinning him down. He looked up, and there stood General Carter. No armor, no helmet, just a human standing over him, calm and unimpressed. "You're beaten," Carter said simply. Zorvak's chest heaved. His pride screamed at him to resist, but his body refused. He had no strength left. No fleet, no empire, only defeat. And so, for the first time in Varnock history, a supreme commander of their mighty fleet did something no Varnock had ever done before. He lowered his weapon. He surrendered. The war was over. But for the Varnock Empire, the nightmare was just beginning. Admiral Zorvak sat in cold silence, his claws twitching against the metal restraints that bound his wrists. The once mighty warrior, feared across the stars, was now nothing more than a captive. Around him, his surviving officers were shackled, their eyes filled with shame and despair. The humans had stripped them of their weapons, their armor, everything that once made them warriors. Now they were prisoners, lined up inside a massive warship, surrounded by heavily armed human soldiers. A door at the far end of the chamber slid open with a hiss. General Carter stepped inside, his sharp gaze scanning the captured Varnock. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator that had already won. "Welcome to your new reality," Carter said, his voice calm, controlled. "You came to conquer us. You came to enslave us. But now your empire is the one at our mercy." Zorvak bared his fangs but said nothing. There was no point in growling empty threats. The humans had already proven their dominance. Carter continued, pacing slowly. "You expected to crush us in a day. Instead, your fleet was shattered, your warriors scattered, and your people left defenseless. Tell me, Admiral, what do you think happens next?" Zorvak's tail twitched. "You will execute us," he spat. "It is what we would have done." Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Admiral, you still don't understand. Humans don't think like the Varnock." His expression darkened. "We're far worse." A chill ran through the room. Even the most hardened Varnock warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Carter stepped forward until he was towering over Zorvak. "You won't die today. That would be merciful. No, we're going to send you back to your empire." Zorvak's eyes widened slightly. "Back." Carter nodded. "Alive. But not as a warrior. Not as a commander. You're going back as something far worse." He leaned in. "You're going back as a warning." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zorvak clenched his fists, his pride screaming in defiance. But deep down, a cold truth settled in his bones. This was worse than death. A warrior who died in battle became a legend. A warrior who surrendered became a disgrace. The Varnak Empire would never look at him the same way again. His own people would see him as a failure, a symbol of weakness. His name, once feared, would be spat upon. And that was exactly what the humans wanted. Carter straightened and turned to his soldiers. "Prepare the prisoners for transport. We're sending them home." The humans moved swiftly, dragging the captured Varnak to their feet. Shackles clanked as they were marched down the corridors, past the wreckage of their own warships, past the ruined husks of their mighty fleet. Zorvak saw it all. He saw the twisted remains of the dominants, the shattered hulls of Varnak dreadnoughts drifting lifelessly in space. He saw the cold efficiency of the human war machine, the way they moved, the way they dismantled the last remnants of his invasion force. The Varnak had thought humans were weak. But now, Zorvak understood the truth. The humans weren't just strong. They were patient, calculating. They had let the Varnak think they were easy prey, only to strike with overwhelming force when the time was right. And the worst part, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. As Zorvak was loaded onto a transport ship, his heart pounded with a new kind of fear. He had once believed the Varnak Empire to be the greatest power in the galaxy. Now he knew better. The humans had won this war. And soon, they would come for the rest of the galaxy. The Varnak homeworld, Drazak Prime, had never known fear. Its towering spires, colossal war foundries, and unbreakable defense fleets had ruled the galaxy for centuries. No enemy had ever dared to challenge its might. Until now. The sky above the capital city burned with the wreckage of what remained of the once mighty Varnak armada. Debris rained down like a cruel mockery of their past victories, the shattered remnants of warships that were supposed to bring glory to their empire. The invasion force that had departed with cheers and celebration had returned in chains. Admiral Zorvak stepped off the human transport ship, his wrists bound, his once pristine uniform torn and stained. The Supreme Warlord, leader of the Varnak Empire, stood waiting at the base of the landing platform, flanked by his elite guards. His cold, reptilian eyes burned with fury. The silence was deafening. Every warrior, every official, every citizen watching from the city streets knew what had happened. Their greatest fleet had been humiliated. The war they thought would end in easy conquest had turned into their worst nightmare. And now, Zorvak, their once glorious admiral, was proof of their failure. He fell to his knees, not because he was forced to, not because of his wounds, but because he knew what was coming. The Supreme Warlord slowly approached, his long cloak dragging behind him. He loomed over Zorvak, claws twitching, muscles tense. "You were given the greatest fleet in our history," he hissed. "You were given an empire's trust." His voice was cold, emotionless. "And you returned as a broken coward." Zorvak didn't flinch. He had expected this. He had once believed death was the worst fate a warrior could suffer. But now he knew better. Disgrace was worse. "Tell me," the Supreme Warlord growled, "who are these humans?" Zorvak lifted his head, his voice hollow. "They are not prey," he said. "They are not weak." He took a slow breath. "They are the true apex predators of the galaxy." Murmurs rippled through the gathered officials. The words were blasphemy. To admit that another species was superior to the Varnak was unthinkable. The Supreme Warlord's claws flexed. "Do you know what your failure has cost us?" Zorvak nodded. "Everything." The Supreme Warlord's tail lashed, his rage barely contained. "Then tell me, Admiral," he sneered, "why should I let you live?" Zorvak's next words sent a chill through everyone present. "Because if you kill me, you will never understand what is coming." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. The Supreme Warlord narrowed his eyes. Explain. Zorvik's voice was steady. You believe the humans will be satisfied with victory. He shook his head. They will not. They let me live for a reason. He swallowed hard. They want us to fear them. They want us to know what they can do. His jaw tightened. And soon, they will come here. A deep growl rumbled through the crowd. The Supreme Warlord's tail stopped moving. His rage dimmed, replaced with something far more dangerous. Concern. They are watching us. Zorvek continued. Studying us. Planning. We thought we were the hunters, but we were wrong. He exhaled sharply. The humans are waiting for us to make a move. His voice turned grim. And if we do, they will end us. For the first time in Varnak history, uncertainty gripped the hearts of its rulers. The Supreme Warlord stared down at Zorvek, deep in thought. Finally, he turned to his advisors. We cannot allow this to go unanswered, he declared. We must prepare. Zorvek shook his head. No. The Supreme Warlord glared. No. Zorvek met his gaze. If you prepare for war, the humans will see it. And they will not wait. He took a slow, steady breath. You do not prepare to fight something you cannot defeat. The Supreme Warlord's claws twitched. Then what do you suggest? Zorvik's voice was barely a whisper. You survive. A ripple of unease passed through the gathering. For the first time in their history, the mighty Varnak Empire faced a reality they had never considered. They were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy, and the nightmare was only beginning.